Producer Profile is a show where we showcase some of the talented people who work behind the scenes in the entertainment, business, and local communities while making positive influences on the lives of others.
Welcome to Producer Profile. I'm Stella Winston.
And I'm Jim Hill.
Our guest producer is a wealth of knowledge. He has a show called Bad Street USA, and its focus is on teens, ethics, values, and self-esteem. His name is Charles Thomas. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate
now,
it.
one of the things that I found very interesting is that he knows a lot about local history, New York history. And I'm sort of going to jump to that because I just want to make sure that that gets in before the show goes off. Like, for instance, you talk about Fort Greene Park over here, and that's very significant in African American history. What is that?
Well, I'm talking now about the Underground Railroad.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of the slaves used to flee from the plantations in the South, seeking their freedom into the North to get to Canada. And they traveled through most of the northern cities, especially New York here. New York was a slave state too. So the Dutch used to control this part of New York and Brooklyn. And they had some battles here in Brooklyn. And they had major battles called the Battle of Brooklyn, in which George Washington marched through Brooklyn. And they had battles underneath the Verrazano Bridge, where at that time the Verrazano Bridge didn't exist. So they had sailors who participated in the armies back then, black sailors. And they were the major fighters, and at the same time they were good fighters. And so the British knew this, and the British, if they captured them, they tortured them more, and they also killed them, a lot of them. And so in this Fort Greene Park you're talking about, which is across the street from Brooklyn Tech High School, has about 300 black sailors who are buried underneath this monument that stands in the middle of the park. There's like a metal monument like the Tower of Pisa, or not the Tower of Pisa, but the Paris, France,
Eiffel Tower.
Sure. And so this monument has about 300 soldiers buried down underneath in the crypt. Mm-hmm. And that was in honor for them fighting in that battle.
Now, why is that small piece of information, that's just an example, why is that important for a young black person's self-esteem? And you have so many more that I'd like for you to share with us.
Right. Well, see, most people growing up here in Brooklyn, or even in Queens and Nassau and Suffolk, don't realize that a lot of the history is in and around these communities. There's Weeksville over on Dean Street, Fulton Street, and downtown where everyone shops, over in Red Hook. All these were different trails that the soldiers used to march when this used to be a marshland or farmland. Brooklyn used to be a lot of farm and marsh. And so as a result, this here history, if the young person knew this was in and around their neighborhood, a lot of the metal gates that appear in front of these brownstones, the slaves were the ones who were the welders and the carpenters who built all that. And they call that Ndinka art. And so these metal gates have this curvature, and some of them look like a spear, but all those were done by the carpenters back in the 1800s to 1700s. And so if these young people knew this existed right in and around these neighborhoods, Atlantic Avenue, Dean Street, Fulton Street, Red Hook, as I said earlier, and you go out to Long Island, you got Hempstead, you have Freeport. These were names that meant something when the slave was trying to seek their freedom. Mm-hmm. And so you go out to the Long Island, you say, how did all these African Americans or blacks get out here? Well, how come this neighborhood is so concentrated? And that was from when they were seeking their freedom. And then you have the Shinnecock Indians if you go out to Riverhead toward the end of the Long Island.
Now, Rikers Island is, of course, if I say that, that's where you go when you get arrested. And so many of our young black males, that's where they wind up. But there's a historical significance that a lot of us are unaware of. What is that?
Rikers Island, the colored troops trained at Rikers Island back in 1864. and they had a regiment of colored troops who traveled from Rikers Island to Union Square, which is down by 14th Street, for a ceremony and so forth. So back during the Civil War, the colored troops, they used to call them, trained at Rikers Island, and the white troops trained at Central Park. So here again, you know, all this is history, and then later on you had the Buffalo Soldiers who fought in the Indian Wars out in the West and so forth. And upstate New York too, Buffalo Soldiers came through. We put a monument out in Chenango County up by Binghamton, New York, where the Buffalo Soldiers stayed at a, what they call the fairground, but it's a local airport where small planes fly in. And here's a town that's lily white in central New York, but yet the Buffalo Soldiers came through there in 1911.
Well, let me ask you this. Reparations, they had a big march for reparations to pay back the African Americans for the cruelty during slavery. When we look at this area, you know, like you look at Brooklyn, and you see that New Jersey was the last state to really free themselves
from Jim Crow.
Right. You say, can there be some parity? Can there be some equality with the money being actually given back to the African Americans, where you see they were African Americans who owned slaves? You know, I mean, it becomes very confusing with that that struggle right now. I mean, do you see the youth getting involved in this?
Well, no, the youth, unfortunately, are caught up where they're in the now generation. They don't care about any of that. They say that happened back then. Mm-hmm. They want everything now. They say they're not going to live a long time. They don't believe they can live to be 90, 115 years old, 110 years old, or even 85 years old. To them, 35 or 32 is, they think they'll be dead by then, especially the male. So what it is, unfortunately, if you realize the slaves built Washington, D.C., and they built the forts, here again, Fort Totten, and the different forts, the Battery Park down in lower Manhattan, slaves had to build all these places because in those days, if the white people were in charge, you know, they didn't do no work. They had the slaves to do the work. So if the young people knew about the infrastructure that America thrives off of today, including these corporations now, CSX and Aetna Life Insurance, New York Life Insurance. There's so many major corporations that made their money, Brown Brothers, Harem, banks and so forth, Fleet Bank. Fleet Bank came from the fleet of ships that used to bring the slaves. So if you think of the money these corporations made, if you come forward to 9/11, where now I think it's about 600 families that are going to sue for $30 trillion or something just for the loss of their families, 600 people. And yet they say as many as 100 million slaves were killed and were involved in the slave trade. They say it can be as much as 400 million because slaves were dropped off in Brazil and Central America and South America, not South America so much, but yeah, South America if you talk Brazil, but also you talk at the Caribbean. So if you look at the numbers and the people say, well, they're asking too much, and yet you look at the communities, you're saying, well, why are these people still struggling? And they're only 100 years up from slavery. Right. Something is holding them back. Right. And we hold ourselves back because the slavery was so brutal that we unfortunately hold this on ourselves, and we're killing each other, we're calling each other the N-word. So all the things that used to be done on the plantation, we do it to ourselves. They used to use cocaine to keep the slaves from running away. Now we're strung out on drugs and cigarettes and alcohol, so we stay in one place. We don't hold a job on a regular basis or what have you, or don't know how to get up and go to work every day.
So do you see reparations as part of the solution to what's going on in the African American community, and how would it be repaid?
Well, again, if you go back to 9/11, people are now suing, saying that these people were young who died, bless them all, and it's a major tragedy. But at the same time, they say over the lifetime, these people could have earned $1 million, $2 million. if they knew, apparently they knew how to go to work every day, because some of them been working for 5 years, 7 years, 20 years at the job. So if they knew how to go to work on a regular basis, they would have made over $1 million. Just like if you take a minimum wage job, you can make over $12,000 a year.
Right.
And if you multiply that over 10 years, that's $120,000. But a lot of young people say, I don't work for minimum wage. But when I was young, minimum wage was 90 cents an hour. $5.35 is a lot of money.
Right.
But they don't see that.
See, I'm having a big argument with my nephew because I was trying to explain to him about the 40 acres and a mule, and he was saying, I want a Lamborghini and a pool.
Right.
Okay. And do you know the young people went along with what he was saying as opposed to what I was saying?
Right. Because, see, you're grown up, and the young people are still young people.
Okay.
Now the young people are growing up later in life. I just heard a rapper, Chuck D or Chuck P or whatever his name is. He's a major rapper. And he broke it down. He says, there's young guys driving these Escalade, these Cadillac 4x4s or whatever, 20, 24 years old, and they get a flat tire, and 3 of them are standing there, big bruisey guys, say, oh, I don't change no flat tire. I got to call AAA because I don't know how to change a flat tire. So unfortunately, young people are maturing later in life due to this hip hop and so forth. So even though they may be 18, 21 years old, they look grown, but their mentality, their thinking pattern is a little bit off, and you know that you don't kind of mature until you're in your 30s, your 40s, you know? And young people don't go that far. They think they're gonna get it now, so they're not gonna wait. So you have young people now who are 28, 30 years old, still sounding like teenagers.
Right.
And then they're saying, maybe they start become a man when they're 32, 35, and they say, I gotta give this all up.
Okay, well, we're going to take a musical break, Charles. We'll be back. We're going to hear Cannonball Adderley, who's one of the greatest jazz saxophonists, perform a song that his brother wrote, Nat Adderley, called The Work Song.
The Work Song, huh?
2, 3, 4.
Welcome back. You're watching Producer Profile, and our guest is Charles Thomas, and he's a wealth of information. And you have a website called freedomtrail.org, and that is focused on the
Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad.
Now, I want to just throw out the name Auburn, New York. Now, Auburn is the place where a major prison is that houses a lot of African Americans and
males. And there's also a juvenile female called the Harriet Tubman female residential.
Now, what is the connection
women.
between Harriet Tubman and Auburn?
Okay, Auburn has two things that Harriet Tubman left. Harriet Tubman lived in Auburn in her final years, and she left a home there, an estate. Her gravesite also is in Auburn, which is about maybe a quarter of a mile, half a mile from her home. Her home is a historical visitors center, but yet the average person downstate here knows of Auburn as a state penal facility. 70% of the prisoners in upstate New York come from house communities down here, downstate, from Brooklyn, Bronx, Manhattan, Queens, Staten Island. But the majority of the African American and Hispanic prisoners upstate come from downstate, and they come from the 7 communities, Bed-Stuy, Crown Heights, and so forth, Harlem, South Bronx. And so all the upstate prisons are feeding into this depressed economy, which is upstate. New York State used to be known as a dairy state. And so a lot of farmers are out of work upstate, so now they're in these prisons, controlling the prisoners as correctional officers. So back to the Board of Education, a lot of young people, unfortunately, are dropping out of school early or committing crimes, and as a result, they come down with a felony charge or whatever, and now you can be caught in a fight, or if you fight with a teacher, that's considered a felony.
So it's ironic that Auburn is the place where Harriet Tubman, it was her home, and it also houses so many African American males today, and it's almost unfair.
Well, like I say,
it is unfair.
We spoke earlier about Rikers Island. Rikers Island had a great image of these soldiers who fought in the Civil War, but yet it's only known for the prisoners over there. If you talk about the Navy Yard, the Brooklyn Navy Yard also was known for its soldiers who were wounded in those battles. They buried the colored soldiers in the back in the swamp, which is right on Flushing Avenue, and Flushing and the BQE used to be a softball field. I just looked at the sign this morning. They erected a sign saying it's a burial ground for the Navy soldiers, but yet that part of the cemetery was a swamp, and they only buried the black soldiers. In 1997, Sonny Carson discovered the remains of his cousin and had his remains exhumed and then reinterred in Ghana. You got the building, the federal building that's built on top of the burial ground in Lower Manhattan by City Hall, and all the federal and state courts in Lower Manhattan, including City Hall, in which they built a federal building on top of the graveyard. Again, that was considered marsh or swamp when they had all the blacks who were buried there. But yet they built the federal building. If you go into the federal building, you walk inside the elevators have bars in it, and you think you're walking into a prison.
You know, one of the things, I was sitting on the block, you know, in the Fort Greene projects this Friday, and I was talking to a dope fiend, and he was saying to me, here today, gone today. And he was breaking this down. He had a view of our youth. He said, Hill, he said, we're going downhill. And it was almost a blues, a no hope. What do you see in terms of our youth? Do you see them just going downhill?
Well, no, technically speaking, if you really go to schools and so forth, and if you really see the youth in reality, there's more good youth than the bad youth. But the newspapers are sold by them showing what the bad youth are doing. it's just that now with this hip hop and the images that are projected on television and in the film, they say art imitates life, and a lot of young people, unfortunately, are imitating what they see. And you would think, you know, that after all these years of smoking and seeing people die from cancers from smoking, that young people wouldn't pick up smoking. But yet they're buying the cigarettes. The cigarettes take 28 years off their life. And the females get sicker quicker with cancers than the males. And then they drank the alcohols, the 40 ounce. I saw a kid the other day, they turned him down because he didn't prove that he was 18 or 21. And so he went out walking down the street. So I said, well, maybe he did a blessing in disguise, you know, because you can live long enough that you're not drinking. The kid said, I'm going to die anyway. I don't care, I'm going to die. You know, and I said, but you can live longer, you know, if you don't drink. He said, no, I'm going to die anyway, man. I got to die from something. So you see, the system programs us, the rap music, all the Def Jam and Def this, you know, and you talked about the drugs, you know, years ago if somebody said dope, you know, you say, wow, I can't deal with that, but now dope is a hip word.
Now, Charles, you have a television show called Bad Street USA, and you've done like 97 or more shows. Why did you name it Bad Street USA?
Well, at the time, young people were buying sneakers for $150, $300. They were wearing warm-up suits that cost $150, $200. And they were killing each other over not diamonds, but the gold necklaces and the gold in your mouth. These guys had their teeth capped and so forth. And so they all say, I'm bad, you know, they think they're bad. So I says, wow. Somebody has to try to tell them some of the good things that they need to do, because a lot of parents never told the young people how to behave properly, because a lot of the parents had the young people when they were teenagers themselves. So sometimes it was the baby raising the baby. And as a result, the parent didn't know how to be a parent, and then the child became loose. And the system, young people, especially blacks and Hispanics, never got locked up in these great numbers the way they have in the past 5-10 years.
Right.
In the history of the race of people. But the prison industrial complex feeds a lot of jobs. It feeds the clerks, it feeds the police, it feeds these correctional officers, it feeds Heinz ketchup, it feeds the food industry. Then they have a furniture Concertco that builds the furniture that the prisoners making 28 cents an hour or whatever. So there's a lot of things tied into this prison industrial complex that they discovered they can get off the backs of young people. So now young people can't ride their bikes on the sidewalk, because if they ride their bikes on the sidewalks, the cops can pull them over, because some young people ride on their bikes with guns in their pockets. So now if the cop pulls over a young person riding a bike, they say, get off me. And now the kid didn't listen to the policeman, he can be in trouble. So it's a whole series of things. Like I said, fighting in the classroom with a teacher, that's considered a felony now. So there's a lot of tricks or traps now that the young people don't realize that they can fall into.
So you don't see the young people as really doomed, though?
No, they're not doomed, but like I say, everything's supposed to be bad, dope, and, you know, it's supposed to be a hip word and all this other death and stuff. So I said to Bad Street USA, let them come into Bad Street thinking they're going to see some bad things, and we're talking about values, ethics, and the self-esteems. They're smoking now these blunts, you know, that they have the cigar wrap, and that's how to burn. They can get tongue cancer and all other cancers, you know, from this heat that they're blowing the marijuana inside of a cigar leaf, you know. But, you know, that's a Philly blunt to them. So they think that's the way to get wasted. And then you hear these bizarre crimes, unfortunately, young people do when they're under the influence of these different drugs. And then they don't realize how severe the punishment can be.
Well, Charles Thomas, thank you so much for coming on Producer Profile. You are a
So
wealth of
fast.
Yes, you are a wealth of information, and your show will be coming on again soon.
Oh, sure, it comes to theirs.
Okay, all right. Thanks for watching Producer Profile. I'm Stella Winston.
And I'm Jim Hill.
Until next time, bye-bye.